Emma Wilson sat in the small white room at the doctor's office. Her hands would not stop shaking as she held the paper with her test results. The 43-year-old woman had worked as a librarian in Manchester for 15 years. She had always been the healthy one in her family. But for the past 6 months, something had been wrong. Every morning, Emma woke up feeling like she had not slept at all. Her body ached in places she did not know could hurt. Simple tasks like carrying books at work or playing with her children made her feel exhausted. At first, she thought it was just stress from her busy life. "Emma, I need to talk to you about your test results," Dr. Thompson said as he sat down across from her. His voice was gentle, but Emma could see the serious look in his eyes. Emma's heart started beating faster. She had been coming to see Dr. Thompson for over 10 years. He had delivered both of her children. She trusted him. But right now she was scared of what he might say. "You have a rare autoimmune condition," Dr. Thompson explained slowly. "This means your body's defense system is attacking your own healthy cells. That's why you've been feeling so tired and weak." Emma felt like the room was spinning. She had never heard of this condition before. "What does this mean for me?" she asked. "You'll need to take several different medications every day for the rest of your life," Dr. Thompson continued. "Some of them will need to be taken at exact times. You'll also need to come in for regular checkups so we can monitor how you're doing." Emma's mind immediately went to her family. Her husband, James, worked long hours at the factory. Their daughter, Lucy, was only 12 years old, and their son, Tom, was just 8. They had been planning a special family trip to Scotland for months. They had saved money and made reservations at a small hotel near a beautiful lake. "Will I be able to travel?" Emma asked, her voice so quiet it was almost a whisper. Dr. Thompson paused for a moment. Emma could see him thinking carefully about his answer. "It will be more complicated than before," he said honestly. "You'll need to be very careful with your medications. You'll need to plan ahead and make sure you have everything you need. But it's not impossible." Emma nodded, but she felt like crying. Everything in her life was about to change. She had always been the one who organized family trips and adventures. She loved discovering new places with James and the children. Now she wondered if those happy days were coming to an end. After leaving the doctor's office, Emma walked home very slowly. The familiar streets of her neighborhood looked different somehow. The corner shop where she bought milk every morning. The park where Tom played football with his friends. The bus stop where Lucy waited for school. Everything looked the same, but Emma felt like she was seeing it all through new eyes. When she reached her small house, Emma sat on the front step for a few minutes. She could hear the sounds of her neighbors going about their normal lives. Mrs. Patterson was watering her garden next door. The Johnson family was having dinner. And she could smell something delicious cooking. Everything seemed so normal for everyone else. That evening, after dinner was finished and the dishes were washed, Emma sat with James on their small sofa in the living room. The children were upstairs doing their homework and getting ready for bed. The house was quiet, except for the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. "I'm scared, James," Emma finally admitted. She had been trying to act normal all evening, but now she could not hide her feelings anymore. James moved closer to her on the sofa. "What are you scared of?" he asked softly. "What if I can't keep up with everyone when we travel?" Emma said. "What if I get sick when we're far from home? What if I forget to take my medications? What if something bad happens and I can't take care of Lucy and Tom?" James took her hand in his. His hands were rough from working at the factory, but they felt warm and strong. "Emma, we'll figure this out together," he said. You're the strongest person I know. You've handled everything life has thrown at us so far." Emma looked at her husband. They had been married for 16 years. He had always been there for her, through good times and difficult times. But right now, she did not feel strong at all. She felt afraid and alone, even though James was sitting right next to her, outside. The wind was blowing through the trees in their small garden. Emma could hear the sound of cars passing by on the street. Life was continuing as normal for everyone else. But for Emma, everything had changed in just one afternoon. 3 months had passed since Emma received her diagnosis from Dr. Thompson. The autumn leaves were falling outside her kitchen window, and the days were getting shorter. Emma had learned to take her medications every morning and evening without forgetting. She had a special box with compartments for each day of the week. But even though she was managing her condition better, she still felt like a prisoner in her own life. The family trip to Scotland had been cancelled 2 weeks after her diagnosis. Emma had called the hotel and explained that she could not travel due to health reasons. The manager was understanding and refunded their money. But Emma felt terrible about disappointing her family. Since then, she rarely left the house except to go to work at the library and to visit Dr. Thompson for her regular checkups. Emma's world had become very small. She went to work, came home, helped the children with their homework, and went to bed early because she was always tired on weekends. She stayed home while James took Lucy and Tom to the park or to visit friends. Emma told herself it was better this way. She did not want to slow everyone down or cause problems. One rainy Tuesday evening in October, Emma was washing dishes in the kitchen when her 12-year-old daughter Lucy came running in. Lucy was carrying her tablet computer, and her eyes were bright with excitement. "Mom, look at this," Lucy exclaimed, holding up the tablet screen. "This lady travels all over the world. And she takes medicine every day, just like you." Emma dried her hands on a kitchen towel and looked at the screen. It showed a colorful travel blog with the title Adventures with Chronic Illness. There were photos of beautiful places, mountains, beaches, old castles, and busy city streets. The blogger was a woman named Kate who looked to be about Emma's age. "She says here that lots of people with illnesses still travel," Lucy continued, scrolling through the blog posts. "Look, she went to Italy last month, and here's a post about France. She even went to Japan. She has tips and everything about how to manage medications when you're traveling." Emma felt something she had not felt in months, a tiny spark of hope. She had assumed that her traveling days were over. She had thought that people with chronic illnesses like hers had to stay close to home and their doctors. But here was proof that she might be wrong. "Can I see that for a minute?" Emma asked, taking the tablet from Lucy. Emma sat down at the kitchen table and started reading Kate's blog more carefully. Kate had written about visiting museums in Rome while managing her medication schedule. She had shared photos of herself hiking in the French countryside, explaining how she had to rest more often than other hikers but still enjoyed the beautiful views. There was a post about eating local food in Tokyo and how she had researched which restaurants could accommodate her dietary restrictions. That night, after Lucy and Tom had gone to bed, Emma spent hours reading Kate's blog. She discovered that Kate was not the only one. There were comments from other travelers who managed diabetes, heart conditions, and autoimmune diseases just like Emma's. They shared stories of beautiful places they had visited and challenges they had overcome. One woman had written about traveling to Scotland with her family despite having a chronic illness. She had posted photos of herself standing by a lake, surrounded by mountains. Another person had shared tips about packing medications for long flights. There were discussions about travel insurance and finding doctors in foreign countries. Emma read story after story of people who had not let their health conditions stop them from exploring the world. Some traveled slowly and carefully, but they still traveled. Some had to plan more than healthy people, but they still had adventures. Some faced difficulties, but they found ways to solve problems and keep going. The next morning, Emma sat at the breakfast table with James and the children. Tom was eating his cereal very slowly. As usual, Lucy was reading a book while she ate her toast. James was drinking his coffee and checking his phone for work messages. James, Emma said quietly, "What if we tried a short trip? Just a weekend in the Lake District." James looked up from his phone with surprise. Emma had not mentioned traveling since her diagnosis. "Are you sure you're ready?" he asked gently. Emma nodded slowly. "I think I need to try," she said. "I don't want to spend the rest of my life being afraid. I've been reading about other people who travel with chronic illnesses. Maybe I can do it too." Little Tom looked up from his cereal bowl. His face was covered with milk, and his eyes were wide with excitement. "Can we go to the place with the ducks?" he asked. Emma remembered the lake they had visited 2 years ago. There had been ducks and swans, and Tom had spent hours throwing breadcrumbs into the water. She had felt so healthy and happy that day. For the first time in months, Emma laughed. It was a real laugh, not the forced smile she had been giving everyone. "Yes, Tom," she said. "We can go see the ducks." Emma stood in her small kitchen, staring at the pile of medication bottles scattered across the wooden table. There were 6 different bottles, each with long names she could barely pronounce. Some pills were white, some were blue, and some were tiny yellow capsules. She had been researching travel rules on her laptop for 3 weeks, but everything seemed so complicated and confusing. "How am I supposed to remember all these rules?" Emma asked James, who was sitting beside her at the table. She felt completely overwhelmed by all the information she had been reading. James picked up one of the printed papers from the internet. "What does this one say?" he asked, trying to help. "It says I need something called TSA guidelines," Emma replied, her voice shaking slightly. "I need doctor's letters, and I have to keep all my medications in their original prescription bottles. Everything has to go in my carry-on bag, not in the suitcase that goes under the plane." Emma had printed out page after page of rules and requirements. There were rules about liquid medications, rules about pills, rules about what documents she needed to bring. The more she read, the more worried she became. "What if the security people at the airport take my medications away?" Emma asked James. "What if I forget something important? What if they don't believe that I really need all these pills?" Emma had already called her doctor's office 3 times that week. The first time, she asked for a letter explaining her condition. The second time, she asked if the letter had enough information. The third time, she asked if she needed any other special documents. Dr. Thompson's assistant, Mrs. Davies, was very patient with Emma. "Don't worry, dear," she said. "We've written letters from many patients who travel. You'll be fine." But Emma did not feel fine. She felt anxious and scared. She had printed out all the official documents she could find. She had made lists of everything she needed to remember. She had checked her lists twice and then checked them again. Still, she felt like she was forgetting something important. That Tuesday evening, Emma was sitting at her computer when she remembered something. A few months ago, she had found a travel blog written by a woman named Kate. Kate had the same type of autoimmune condition as Emma. Kate had written about traveling to different countries while managing her health. Emma found Kate's blog and clicked on the contact page. She typed a message. "Hi Kate, I'm planning my first trip since my diagnosis. I'm terrified about traveling with medications. Any advice?" Emma did not expect to hear back from Kate quickly. She thought it might take a week or more to get a reply. But the next morning, when Emma checked her email, there was already a message from Kate. "Hi, Emma. I remember that fear so well. Here's what helped me." Kate's message was long and detailed. She had included a checklist of everything Emma would need to do. At the end of the message, Kate wrote, "If you want to talk on the phone, I'm happy to help. Sometimes it's easier to explain things by talking." Emma felt tears in her eyes. She had been feeling so alone with her worries. Now here was someone who understood exactly what she was going through. That evening, Emma called Kate. Kate lived in London, but she had traveled to many countries since her diagnosis 5 years ago. "I was so nervous about my first trip," Kate said, laughing. "I arrived at the airport 3 hours early because I was so worried about the security check. But you know what? The security staff were actually very understanding. Most of them deal with medical travelers every day. They know what to expect." Kate explained everything step by step. She told Emma how to pack her medications so they would be easy to find and check. She explained what documents to bring and how to talk to security officers if they had questions. Kate even shared tips about managing medication schedules when traveling to different time zones. "The most important thing is preparation," Kate said. "Once you know what to expect, it becomes routine. After my first few trips, I stopped worrying so much." Emma spent the next week organizing everything carefully. She made copies of all her prescriptions and put them in a special folder. She backed extra medication in case their trip was delayed. She even practiced explaining her condition to James, so she would know what to say if anyone asked her questions. Emma wrote down Kate's phone number and put it in her purse. Kate had told her to call if she had any problems or questions while traveling. By Friday, Emma looked at all her preparations. Her medications were organized in a special travel case. Her documents were in order. She had emergency contact numbers and extra supplies. Emma did not feel completely fearless, but she felt ready. She had done everything she could to prepare for this trip. Saturday morning arrived with bright sunshine streaming through Emma's bedroom window. She had been awake since 5 o'clock, checking and rechecking her medication bag for the 5th time. Today was the day she had been both excited about and terrified of for weeks. Her small family was finally going on their weekend trip to the Lake District. Emma, James, Lucy, and Tom stood on the platform at Manchester train station. The morning air was crisp and cool, and Emma could see her breath making small clouds in the air. She clutched her carefully packed medication bag against her chest like it was the most precious thing in the world. "You've got this, Mum," Lucy said, giving Emma a tight hug. At 12 years old, Lucy had become very protective of her mother since the diagnosis. "Remember what that lady Kate told you on the phone. You're prepared for everything." Emma smiled at her daughter. Lucy had been so helpful during the planning process, even helping Emma organize her medications into daily containers. "Thank you, sweetheart," Emma said. "I'm nervous, but I'm also excited." The train pulled into the station with a loud whistle. Tom jumped up and down with excitement. "Are we really going to see the ducks again?" he asked for the 10th time that morning. Double quotes, "Yes, Tom," James said, ruffling his son's hair. "We're going to see all the ducks you want." The train journey took 2 hours. Emma had been worried about taking her medications on the train, but everything went smoothly. She had set alarms on her phone to remind her when to take each pill. Other passengers barely noticed when she quietly took her morning medications. With a bottle of water. Emma felt proud of her preparation. She had practiced this routine at home many times. She had backup medications in James's bag in case she lost her main supply. She had all her doctor's letters and prescriptions in a special folder. Everything was organized exactly the way Kate had suggested. When they arrived at their destination, the small hotel was even prettier than Emma had remembered from the pictures online. The manager, Mrs. Henderson, was a kind woman in her 60s who greeted them warmly. "I have a small refrigerator in your room for your medications," Mrs. Henderson told Emma quietly. "I've had other guests with similar needs. Please let me know if you need anything else." Emma felt tears in her eyes. She had been so worried about explaining her condition to strangers. But Mrs. Henderson made it seem completely normal. On Sunday morning, the family took a gentle walk round Lake Windermere. The lake was surrounded by green hills and old trees that were turning orange and red with autumn colors. Emma had to walk more slowly than she used to, but she was walking. She was outside in the fresh air, enjoying the beautiful scenery with her family. Tom ran ahead to the edge of the lake where a family of ducks was swimming. He had brought a bag of special duck food that they had bought at the hotel. Lucy followed him with her camera, taking photos of the ducks and the mountains. In the background, James walked beside Emma, ready to help if she needed to rest. But Emma felt stronger than she had expected. The cool morning air felt good in her lungs, and the peaceful sound of the water lapping against the shore was relaxing. "I did it," Emma whispered to herself as they sat on a wooden bench overlooking the water. "I actually did it." The weekend was not perfect. Emma felt tired more easily than she used to. She had to rest for 30 minutes after their walk, lying down in the hotel room, while the family waited patiently. She went to bed earlier than everyone else on Saturday night. But she had proven to herself that travel was still possible. When they returned home on Sunday evening, Emma felt different. She had faced her biggest fears and succeeded. The experience gave her confidence to start thinking about longer trips over the next year. Emma gradually took on bigger adventures. In the spring, they spent a week in Wales, staying in a small cottage near the coast. Emma learned how to manage her medications when staying in places without refrigerators in the summer. They took a long weekend trip to Ireland. Emma practiced explaining her condition to airline staff and learned how to adjust her medication schedule for different time zones. Each trip taught Emma something new about managing her condition while traveling. She started keeping a travel journal, writing down what worked well and what she needed to improve for next time. Emma also started sharing her experiences on the internet, joining travel forums for people with chronic illnesses. She answered questions from other nervous first-time travelers who were just beginning their own journeys. "Start small," she would tell them. "Build your confidence step by step. I started with just one weekend, and now I'm planning a trip to France next year." Emma began to realize that her condition, while challenging, had also connected her to a community of brave, adventurous people who refused to let illness define their limits. 2 years after her diagnosis, Emma stood nervously in front of a room full of people at the Manchester Community Centre. The room was packed with about 50 people sitting in plastic chairs ranged in neat rows. Emma had never spoken to such a large group before, and her hands were shaking slightly as she held her notes. She was giving a presentation called "Traveling with Chronic Illness. Your Questions Answered." Emma had been asked to speak by the local health support group after they heard about her successful travels and a growing online following. "I remember sitting in a doctor's office 2 years ago, thinking my traveling days were over." Emma began, her voice becoming warm and steady as she started talking. "I was completely wrong." The audience was full of people who understood exactly what Emma had been through. There were elderly people with diabetes, middle-aged men and women with heart conditions, young adults with autoimmune diseases, and others dealing with various chronic illnesses. They all listened carefully as Emma shared her story. Emma talked about her first terrifying trip to the Lake District and how it had changed her life. She shared practical tips about packing medications properly, getting the right travel insurance, and communicating with airlines about medical needs. She showed photos from her recent trips and explained how she had learned to manage her condition while exploring new places. "The most important thing I learned," Emma said, "is that preparation makes everything possible. You don't have to give up your dreams. You just have to plan them differently." After the presentation, people came up to Emma with questions and stories of their own. A young man named David approached her with tears in his eyes. "My mum has the same condition as you," he said. "She's been afraid to visit us since her diagnosis 6 months ago. We live in London, and she thinks the train journey is too complicated with all her medications. Do you think you could talk to her?" Emma smiled warmly. "Of course, I'd be happy to help her." Emma had started a local support group for travelers with chronic conditions. They met every month at the community center, sharing experiences and encouraging each other. Emma had also partnered with the Manchester Library, where she still worked 3 days a week, to create a special resource center. The center had travel guides adapted for people with health conditions, medication management tips, and a collection of inspirational stories from travelers around the world. Emma's blog. Emma's accessible adventures had grown to thousands of followers from around the world. She shared photos from her trips to Scotland, Wales, Ireland, and France. Her most recent adventure had been a wonderful journey to Portugal with James and the children, where she had successfully managed her medications through different time zones and climates. "Travel looks different for me now," Emma had written. In her latest blog post, "I move slower than I used to. I plan more carefully than other travelers. I rest more often and need to be more flexible with my schedule. But I've learned that different doesn't mean less meaningful. In fact, traveling with a chronic illness has taught me to appreciate small moments and beautiful places in ways I never did before." Emma's condition had not disappeared. She still took multiple medications every day. She still had to be careful about her energy levels and plan ahead for medical needs. But somehow, her condition had transformed from a barrier that kept her trapped at home into a bridge that connected her to people around the world. Emma had helped dozens of people take their first trips after being diagnosed with chronic illnesses. She had consulted with hotels about storing medications properly and worked with travel agencies to create accessible travel plans. She had even started writing a guidebook for medical travelers. One warm evening in late spring, Emma sat in her small garden with James. The children were inside doing homework, and the house was quiet. Emma was reading through a stack of thank you letters from people she had helped over the past year. "Do you ever wish things had been different?" James asked, looking at Emma thoughtfully. Emma considered the question carefully. It was something she had thought about many times over the past 2 years. "I wish I didn't have this condition," she said honestly. "I wish I didn't have to take medications every day and worry about my health. But I don't wish I hadn't learned what I've learned. I don't wish I hadn't met the people I've met." She looked at the stack of letters on the small garden table. There were notes from people thanking her for giving them courage to travel again. There were photos from families who had taken their first trips after diagnosis. There were updates from people who had started their own support groups in other cities. "Sometimes our biggest challenges become our greatest gifts to others," Emma said softly. Watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink above their small garden. The end.